Call this a mulligan.
In a key sentence in my remarks, I said the word would instead of wouldn't. The sentence should have been, I don't see any reason why I wouldn't, or why it wouldn't be Russia. So, just to repeat it, I said the word would instead of wouldn't. And the sentence should have been, and I thought I would be maybe a little bit unclear on the transcript or unclear on the actual video. The sentence should have been, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be Russia.
All right, now this is the bad shot he wanted to forget. Remember this?
My people came to me, Dan Coates came to me, and some others. They said they think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be.
All right, so that was then, all clarified now. Welcome, everybody. I'm Neil Cavuto, and this is your world, but not so fast. The president isn't getting off the hook the way maybe some in the White House thought he would. To Kristen Fisher at the White House with the very latest on this 180. What do we make of this, Kristen?
Well, I'll tell you what, Neil, this was supposed to be just a meeting with Republican lawmakers about tax reform 2.0, but now all anybody is talking about is what President Trump just said about what went down in Helsinki. And, you know, this really was just a stunning admission and a very rare reversal from a president who often doesn't make these kind of admissions or make these kinds of reversals. First, to the admission, which you had just pointed out, President Trump said today that he simply misspoke, that he meant to say the words would not when instead he said would. And, you know, he said that he figured it out by simply reading a transcript. He went through it, realized he made an error, and decided to come out today and correct himself. As for the reversal, and this is probably the one that's generating the most headlines and the one that had the most impact for the United States and its relations around the world, President Trump really did make a reversal. Yesterday, he was asked, you know, who do you believe most? Do you believe the U.S. intelligence community when they say that Russia meddled in the 2016 election, or do you believe Russian President Vladimir Putin? And yesterday, President Trump essentially kind of said that he believed both. But today, President Trump did a 180. Listen.
I'll begin by stating that I have full faith and support for America's great intelligence agencies, always had. And I have felt very strongly that while Russia's actions had no impact at all on the outcome of the election, let me be totally clear in saying that, and I've said this many times, I accept our intelligence community's conclusion that Russia's meddling in the 2016 election.
So, Neil, bottom line, this should go a long way to satisfy or at least quell some of the president's critics. But the fact that he chose not to say that while standing next to Russian President Vladimir Putin on foreign soil, that is not going to go away anytime soon. Neil?
Kristen, do we know if Vladimir Putin has had any response to this yet?
Well, we know the Russian Foreign Secretary, Sergei Lavrov, had said that this was, the summit was wonderful, fabulous. He had lots of very positive things to say about it. But so far, Neil, I have not heard anything in terms of a response to those comments that President Trump just made about an hour ago.
All right, Kristen, thank you. Great reporting as always. So how is all of this playing out? Let's go to Gabby Marangelo, the Washington Examiner. Gabby, what do you think?
Look, I think that this really has a lot of staying power. This is a controversy that's going to continue despite the president's do-over today. Because if you looked at the remarks that he made at the White House during this meeting with congressional Republicans, he did say that he meant in that press conference yesterday that he didn't see any reason why Russia wouldn't have meddled in the 2016 presidential election, and said that he has full faith in the intelligence community. But at the same time, he said, you know, the intel community concluded that it was Russia, but it could have been some others. There are plenty of bad actors out there who would like to meddle in U.S. affairs. And so I think that really lends itself to the question that, you know, whether or not President Trump does in fact believe the intelligence community, which is something that has been raised in the last 24 hours based on those initial comments that he made. And that's something that's going to be continued to play out in the press over the next 24 or 48, maybe even for the rest of the week.
You know, Dan Coates, his intelligence director, was talking about this, that he supported the data. The Russians were involved in trying to screw up the election. Not that it altered the outcome, and most people who have looked at this issue kind of confirmed that. The Russians were definitely involved, but they didn't change the outcome. But he did quote, Dan Coates, he did quote those findings. He just said that he, at the time, this is just yesterday, kind of accepted the position of Vladimir Putin. Now, Vladimir Putin is always going to say that this never happened, and there's much ado about nothing, or get your investigators in the United States over here to talk to these people who presumably were indicted, and we want the same to go over there. That's going nowhere. But where does this put this relationship right now?
I mean, I think we need to wait and see how the Russians react, whether they do issue a statement regarding what President Trump just said about an hour ago. I think it's unlikely that we're going to hear from them at this point, that this will sort of play out behind the scenes. But, you know, it is important that this, what you just mentioned, the fact that President Trump yesterday praised Vladimir Putin for offering to let Bob Mueller and his team of investigators go to Russia and question these individuals who were just indicted last Friday. You know, even though the controversy over Russian meddling in the 2016 election may be over, or at least the White House thinks that this damage control and this statement that was issued earlier today has made that go away, there is still the issue of, you know, what President Trump wants to accomplish when it comes to improving ties with the U.S. and Russia, and whether there is any actual intent by his administration to try and negotiate a deal where there would be some shared intelligence or investigators working with Mueller's team and Mueller's team working with the Kremlin. I mean, obviously that is unlikely, but the fact that the president even entertained that is certainly controversial in and of itself.
Yeah, he thought it was a novel idea. Others immediately said, well, it's a going nowhere idea, but be that as it may, done now. Gabby, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
All right, the read from the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Maryland Democratic Senator Ben Cardin. Senator, very good to have you.
Neil, good to be with you. Thank you.
What do you make of this?
Well, on the world stage yesterday, Mr. Putin heard exactly what he wanted to hear. And when you give Russia an opening, you give Mr. Putin an opening, he'll move on it. We saw that 10 years ago when they moved into Georgia, blocking Georgia's entry into NATO. We saw that when Mr. Putin invaded Ukraine. He interfered in our elections and believes now that he can continue to do those types of activities, and the American president's not going to take action. So I think the damage has been done to America's national security and leadership by that summit. We don't know what happened in the meeting in the room one-on-one, but it's clear from the news conference that Mr. Putin was happy with the meeting.
All right. Does this change anything, though? If the president acknowledged that he might have misstated himself, others are saying he just pulled a 180 here. But does it change anything, Senator?
I don't think so. When you take a look at the totality of what the president has said, including what he said in Helsinki, he's siding with Mr. Putin. He's basically saying the relationship between these two countries is so important. He's not treating Russia under Mr. Putin as an adversary, and that's wrong, because we know that Mr. Putin will continue to act against our national security interests unless we're prepared to stand up to him. And the president certainly did not show that strength at the summit meeting in Helsinki.
But some have wondered what else could be going on here. Nancy Pelosi, I don't know whether you're in agreement with her on this. She said his total weakness, referring to the president, Senator, in the presence of Putin proves that the Russians have something on the president, personally, financially, or politically. Do you believe that?
Well, I can tell you, I listened to Mr. Putin's response to a reporter's question as to whether there was anything on President Trump. And when you listen to Mr. Putin's response, it doesn't give you any comfort level. I don't know. I mean, you're dealing with a KGB operative, former operative. They use tactics that are extraordinary. And that's why we were concerned on the one-on-one meeting in Helsinki. And we just don't know. What we do know is that the Mueller investigation...
But would you still have advised the one-on-one meeting?
No, I would not have. I think after the indictments, unless it was set up clearly to deal with resolving Russia's engagement here in the United States, so that it was very clear not only to Mr. Putin, but to the international community that the president was meeting in order to file the grievances and to get change of behavior. If that was clear, that's one thing, but that's not how this meeting was set up.
We don't know what was done behind the scenes, though, to be fair,
we don't,
right?
but we don't, but we know what the news conference was about. And even with that one change in statement, that news conference was very much pandering to Mr. Putin.
Do you worry, though, Senator? I mean, that a lot of people are going to look at the Obama administration's deal with going ahead and normalizing relations with Cuba. Some people said, well, that was long overdue. We don't know what, greased the skids for that, but it is what it is. Relations are normalized, all of that. That there are sometimes and some conditions where you meet with someone you don't flip over to advance a goal. In this case, with the president wanting to get past this, deal with some other thorny issues, try to remind the Russians not to do this again, if that's the case. Again, take him at his word, sir. What do you make of that?
Well, I agree with that strategy. You want to meet and talk and set up means in which trying to resolve issues. But you have to acknowledge what Russia has done in recent years is so much against U.S. interests that you got to make that clear. You got to make it clear that the attack on our country in 2016 is unacceptable. Their invasion of Ukraine is unacceptable. We'll never recognize Crimea's annexation by Russia. What they're doing in Syria and supporting the Assad regime and war crimes, that needs to be the framework for such a meeting. And if you go into the meeting saying all I'm trying to do is improve a relationship that's been terrible over a long period of time, you give the clear indication that it's going to be acceptable what Mr. Putin has done.
Senator Cardin, thank you very much for taking the time, sir. Appreciate it. I believe Marco Rubio is speaking right now in Washington on these developments. Let's listen in.
About it extensively. I mean, our number one objective is to get it passed in the Senate first. And just today alone, I mean, I've just had a flood of members across the aisle and across the Senate on both sides of the aisle offered to be involved. The majority leader has said that he wants to bring it to the floor. We can figure out a way to get it there without burning 5 days of debate, given all the other issues that are going on. So I feel positive about it. We have some work to do.
Why do you think there's a flood of interest in your bill?
Well, I just think I think people recognize sort of, the need, it's been in the press. There's been a lot of talk about what happened yesterday in the press. And so it serves as a catalyst to sort of take action now about the future. We can all, people are going to continue to argue about all these other things regarding 2016. But we can all agree that we don't want to see this happen again. And so hopefully we can, build a strong majority, which I think we already have, to get this thing passed and into law.
Is the message that Congress doesn't believe that the president would impose these punishments on Russia, so you need to do it instead?
No, I think it's irrespective of who's president. One of the things that, what happens is when these interference things go on, by the time we sort of figure out whether it happened and then go through the congressional process of imposing sanctions, it takes a while. In this particular case, it's in place ahead of time. So it is Putin would very clearly understand up front, this is what's going to happen if you do this again. And he can factor that into his cost-benefit analysis.
But you're not just saying it's coincidence that suddenly everyone's interested in your bill after yesterday.
I'm sure that what happened yesterday and the reaction to it has been a key part of that drive. But we filed it months ago. We're just glad people are jumping on board.
Do you think that momentum is going to decline now that the president has walked back his comments?
I don't expect it will. I mean, most of the people that come up to me came up to me after the fact. Suffice it to say that I think yesterday outlined sort of the ongoing threat that this is going to happen again. And so if that has generated enough interest to get people on board, I'm sorry it took that, but I'm glad that it's happening.
Do you think that the president's correction fully undoes the damage that many people here and abroad think that he did in Helsinki?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know the answer to that. Time will tell. All right, gotta go back to work.
Thank you. All right, that was Marco Rubio, I believe, referring to a measure he had, and this has been on the table for a while right now, to punish Russia through sanctions and other means for meddling in our election. And a lot of Republican support was there for that. Again, there was a fear of taking on the president, who thought that this might go a step too far. We don't know the president's views on this right now, but acknowledging earlier today that the Russians were indeed involved in trying to screw up the 2016 election. Not that it altered the outcome, but the president indicated simply when it appeared that he took Vladimir Putin's side on this, then they had nothing to do with that he was accepting Putin's view on this at face value. Was simply not the case. He just misspoke. That's a moot point to my next guest right now. Chris Kagan is a former Belmont County, Ohio GP chairman, resigning his post as the chairman of the Republican Party there over this very issue. Sir, very good to have you. Did anything that President say earlier today, just about an hour ago, change your mind?
not changed my mind, Neil, and thank you for having me. I was very happy to hear him say they were taking strong actions to safeguard the midterm elections. But unfortunately, with the president trying to alter the meaning of the language that we all saw him use in Helsinki, I'm afraid it's not as credible as those in the White House would hope. I take no joy or pleasure in saying that, but I just don't think that's going to alleviate the problems.
So do you think the president misspoke as he stated that was not his intention, or do you think that was his intention and he was surprised by the blowback he got?
I'm not surprised by the blowback. I think that was entirely appropriate. I think this is classic damage control. I'm a lawyer by profession, so let's just say I don't think the credibility of this witness would hold up.
All right, so here you've stepped down in light of this, and now some of your Republican colleagues might say, whoa, 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 you know, you're adding needless drama to this. You say what?
Well, and I understand that, and I respect that. But, you know, I needed my president yesterday, 6 feet from Vladimir Putin, to basically stick his finger in his chest and say, we know what you did. It will not happen again on my watch. And if it does, there will be, you know, maximum pressure applied to Russia. And what I saw was more akin to, in effect, a hostage situation. And it was a bridge too far. As a matter of conscience, that I'm in a political position. I am a county chairman. And at the end of the day, that's all I am. I'm not a member of Congress. But I have to be, and I should be, in lockstep with the president's agenda and vision. And after that performance, it was clear that not siding with the American intel community, taking President Putin's word for it, it was just a bridge too far for me. But I'm not leaving the party. I'm still a very proud conservative. But that was clearly a direction that I could not support.
Now, the president is fairly popular in your neck of the woods, is he not?
Oh, absolutely. In fact,
so you might have done great harm to yourself politically, right?
No question. No question. But there
have people
are
told you
times,
that? Have people who support the president told you good riddance?
It's starting to come in. No question about that. And President Trump, to give you an example of how popular he is, we hadn't had a Republican county commissioner elected in 40 years until 2016, and now we have 2. So I give the president full marks for bringing those along. But, you know, at the same time, each individual, I believe, has to address their own conscience and their values, and those statements were something that I just could not continue to support.
Did you hear from anyone at the White House?
No, I'm not nearly that important, I'm afraid. In fact, I'm quite shocked, quite honestly, that it's taken the life that it has and given me the opportunity to speak with you
I'm
today.
almost betting someone tweets from the White House on this development, but I could be wrong. But what do you do now? I mean, the president is. Let me just get this straight here, because the president is going to say he hopes to have corrected this by clarifying his position today, whether it was a reversal or he was pressured to. He has changed his mind or whatever, or clarified his mind for the American people and the world. Are you satisfied with just that?
No, Neil, you know, you're a businessman. You know that in the moment, you know, you can't recapture the gravitas that the President of the United States had available to him yesterday. To make that clarification in the cabinet room in the White House without President Putin being there to hear it, to see it in his eyes, to see the conviction in his statement, I just don't see this as anything other than sort of what has to be put out from a political standpoint. But it's going to take a good while, I believe, to rebuild the president's credibility with President Putin.
All right. Thank you very, very much. We'll see what happens. Chris
Thank you very much.
Former Belmont County, Ohio GOP chairman. We're going to have to read on all this from the senator of that fine state, Rob Portman, what he makes of what Mr. Kagan just had to say and what the president just had to say. More to this.
Using Ebates, I've earned $700.
All right, you heard from Marco Rubio a little earlier saying that Senate Republicans are now considering his legislation that would limit and severely restrict Russia if it ever tries to meddle again in a U.S. election. This got a sort of a new lease on life after a number of Republicans particularly criticized the president for his performance of Vladimir Putin, among them saying that the president folded in the face of the Russian strongman. Ohio Republican Senator Rob Portman is a member of the Foreign Relations committee. It looks like this legislation is still being pushed and will still happen. Republicans are leading the effort. Are you for that effort?
Yeah, I think we need to clarify the fact that we believe the Russians did intervene in our election. We believe, by the way, they try to destabilize democracies around the world, and we need to push back. And Neil, what's interesting about all this is that's the consensus not just of the intelligence community, it's the consensus here on the Hill among Republican-led intelligence committees. In other words, the House and Senate Intelligence Committee came up with the same conclusion. So this is not a matter of dispute. And we have done a number of things here, as you know, from the legislative branch as well, like historic sanctions on Russia, like increasing our military budget, which has been effective in putting more pressure on Russia because we have more troops now in Central and Eastern Europe on exercises, like providing lethal weapons for the first time ever for the Ukrainians, which the Obama administration would not do, despite some of us urging them. So when you look at what Congress has done, we've actually done a number of things to push back. There's a disinformation group now at the State Department that pushes back on Russian and other disinformation that is new.
But again, just to be clear, Senator, you believe they did intervene. No one seems to be doubting that. The president seemed to, in his statement yesterday with Vladimir Putin, to question that. Do you believe him when he says he misspoke?
Look, I'm glad he clarified his comments today. I didn't see it live, but I understand he clarified his comments. And, of course, I wish he'd said it in front of President Putin and the world yesterday. But, yeah, I take him at his word. If he says he misspoke, absolutely. But the point is we need to be as one here, pushing back. And in order to be effective, we also have to be with our allies. We're fortunate, I believe, in
what does that mean? What does that mean, sir? I mean, I know this is if they ever try this again, but does this address what they've already done? In other words, would you recommend, or does this legislation address what they already have done?
Well, we have sanctions in place for a number of things with Russia, including Crimea,
but not
which
this,
they
not
illegally
this.
took. Not this, and so that may be appropriate. We do have historic levels of sanctions in place already. And I think they're making a difference. In other words, I think one reason President Putin brings up the sanctions a lot is that he's trying to get out from under them.
But I know that, sir. I'm sorry I'm not clear, and I'm sorry I'm being rude here. But do you know then, Senator, whether the president supports this move, that if they were to do this again, you would slap presumably some additional sanctions? And is he in agreement with that? Would he support you in that?
I don't know. You'd have to ask the White House. I do know that the White House more recently has come out to support some efforts some of us are pushing to protect the electoral process. In other words, to ensure that our state boards of election have what they need. Congress, as you know, just appropriated over $300 million to the states to be able to help protect the elections in 2018. So I know that they are supportive of that. The president signed that. And like so many of these other things, Neil, it came from Congress. The president signed it, so that's okay because we're working together on stuff like that. And I think Congress has a role to play to kind of push the administration, just as, frankly, we pushed the Obama administration on sanctions. So I think that's probably the right response. I do think the president, you haven't asked this question, but I'll volunteer it. I think he's too defensive about what happened in the 2016 elections. You know, he won Ohio by 8 points. He would have won Ohio whether the Russians had been engaged in this disinformation campaign and in their meddling or not. And so it's not about the legitimacy of his election. It is about the sanctity of our electoral process here in America. And so we all need to stand up.
Well, have you guys ever gotten together with him on that to say, look, Mr. President, this has nothing to do with the legitimacy of you being duly elected President of the United States. None of this would have changed the numbers or the outcome. You're the guy. You're the winner. Because it keeps coming back to that. I can understand a little bit of his frustration, maybe because he fears every time it's raised, it raises issues about whether he was duly elected, and he was. So I'm wondering whether there was a meeting where you could just say, Mr. President, we have no doubt, we have all the proof in the world. This happened, didn't change the results, but you have got to be leading the charge to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, I think that message has been delivered by various folks. I do think that he believes there still are some people, and there are, Neil, there's a handful of people who are going to say that his election was illegitimate, but those people are going to say it anyway. So I think what we have to do is kind of get over that issue and just say what they did, and frankly what they've been doing since 1952 probably with regard to trying to meddle in our elections. is unacceptable. Now, they weren't as effective at it until social media gave them, a much more efficient platform to be able to do it.
No, you're right. It gave a new lease on life. I'm sure you're familiar with this Chris Kagan. Maybe you're not. The former Belmont County, Ohio GOP chairman, stepping down as a result of the president's actions on this. What do you think?
Well, I think that's a rarity, but I understand why he's doing it. I heard a little bit of his interview with you. Belmont County, by the way, used to be a pretty solidly Democratic county, and now President Trump won it. I won it. So it's kind of shifting, and it's a classic.
Did you ever talk to him and say, "Hey, Chris, maybe not a good idea to do this"?
No, he didn't. He didn't ask for my advice on it. And,
what do you think of his resigning?
Well, I mean, he's got to make his own decision, but I don't think people should be resigning. I think people should instead be speaking up from their positions of influence, whatever they are, whether it's the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coates. People said he should step aside because of this. No, he should stay there and continue to give the president the advice that he needs. People should stay in their positions to ensure that we are getting what is the real story, and be straightforward about it.
Do you think, Nancy Pelosi, I believe, Senator, I'm just paraphrasing here so I don't want to misspeak, that the Russians must have something on the president for him not to challenge Vladimir Putin. The president has said a few American presidents have been tougher on the Russians. In fact, he's been the toughest in modern times, the kicking out diplomats, all the arrests, sanctions, and all of that. What do you think of what she's saying, that because in that forum, at least the public forum we saw where the two leaders were up there together, he didn't say anything bad about them. In fact, was effusive in his praise, that it didn't sit well.
Yeah, I don't think she's right, because as you say, when you look at the substance, this is the great irony here. You mentioned expelling the diplomats. That was the biggest expulsion, I think, ever. And we actually closed down one of their consular officers on the West Coast as well. Right. I mentioned providing arms to lethal weapons to the Ukrainians, which is something the Russians pushed strongly against. I mentioned the sanctions, which are historic now in place already against Russia. I mentioned the fact that simply rebuilding our military and now taking a more active posture with our other NATO allies in Eastern and Central Europe with these continued troop movements that we've got there to join them in exercises. We just increased the lethality of our armored vehicles there in response to the Russian threat to Eastern Europe and Central Europe. So the actions speak louder than the words, I hope. And so I think that's what's interesting about all this. But both are necessary, because if you don't have strong words, then not only do the Russians wonder, but our allies wonder. And they were listening intently yesterday.
So just to be clear, I want to, on the record here, that the president, he says he misspoke. A lot of people said he just saw the reaction and decided to pivot, whatever. What do you think?
I'd let the White House answer that question, but I'd take him at his word, and I'm glad he was willing to clarify.
All right, Senator, thank you very, very much.
Thanks,
Good catching up with you.
Good to be with you. Take
care.
So
what was it like in that room? The president was meeting with very few people in that room when he did make this announcement on the Russians and what he really meant. So I want you to meet someone who was there.
I actually went after this. And reviewed a clip of
for what the president meant to say, did say, would have said if he could say it all over again with Vladimir Putin, that the markets would be panicking. They were not panicking, just like they really haven't been panicking through this ongoing trade tit for tat, now escalated to trade war. The Dow about 55.5 points today. With us now is former Chrysler and Home Depot CEO, Bob Nardelli. It's interesting, Bob, because you were quickly telling me during the break, as important as this Putin dust-up is, and what the president said or didn't say, you're far more focused on trade issues, aren't you?
Yeah, it's unfortunate that depending on what was said or not said or intended, that creates such a distraction, because, as I talk to my fellow CEOs, the economy is really percolating here. I mean, if you think about where it's going, in spite of tariffs, in spite of sanctions, in spite of some of the things that are being discussed, I really feel very optimistic about corporate America. They're turning in great profits. They're reinvesting capital based upon the administration's previous tax programs. The 2.0 is out.
So all that stuff's good.
It's great.
So what do you, if you would advise the president when you see a dust up and confusion over the Putin thing or the trade stuff, what do you say?
Well, who am I to advise the President of the United States? But it is
Fortune 500 bigwig.
It's very unfortunate. If it was a misstatement yesterday, it's
Do you
very.
believe it was?
If he says it is, I want to believe it was.
Okay.
I mean, I can't believe that he would be 180 degrees from where he was through his campaigns and what he's been saying all along relative to collusion and involvement. I mean,
but I was talking to someone before the show, Bob, who said even if it wasn't, and it's a pivot, and he realized he might have made a mistake or did.
Yes.
That's noteworthy itself, and that's a good sign.
Yes. Yeah, the fact that he's out, correcting himself.
Yeah.
And I think he had to. I think that would have dominated, all of the good things that are going on, unfortunately. And we got a lot of good things going on in America today, in corporate America particularly.
Except when it comes to trade.
Well, I think we have to be, you made a very good point, the volatility in the market. You didn't see it today based on that comment. We've had some great days and we've had some very bad days, but overall, we still seem to be moving in the right direction. So there's a lot of discussion about tariffs, but let's wait and see what actually takes place.
So you think we're going to get something, and that this will force someone's hand, either Europe's hand, China's hand?
Yeah, I think so. I think the only certainty right now is uncertainty. Change is the only constant. And I watched this president, and he reminds me a lot of my mentor, Jack Welch. We'd go into a meeting, he'd ask for 100, I'd go in asking for 50, we'd settle on 75. I think I won, he won. And at the end of the day,
I should have tried that here. I found out all the other anchors are paid, Bob. It really bothered me.
I think you're doing okay.
All right.
You do a great job.
But what do you think of the way the market has been responding to this trade tip? And maybe they're convinced, for what you said, that, hey, it's all going to work out. We've doubted the president before, and gosh, if things haven't gone his way and our way, and we're all richer for it, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. No, I think, he's a very direct person. He kind of says what's on his mind. It's not always filtered. But if you look at what he's done, he really has delivered a lot to people here in the United States. If you look at tax rate, what he's talking about doing now on the middle class.
Yeah, follow-up, right?
To continue to follow up, to help them. If you look at all the participants that will be in the zero tax bracket, if you look at corporations, again, being able to write off 100% of the expense of their investments. The only thing will be the deferral issue on some of these profits offshore. May not like, but overall, I think he can.
Better than what they had. Right?
Better than what they had. He keeps moving our country forward, Neil, and that's a good thing.
All right. Bob, always good seeing about Nardelli, former Home Depot CEO, former Chrysler CEO, GE bigwig, you name it. Well, what a resume. All right, when we come back, you ever wonder what was going on in that room when the president was meeting with key economic aid lawmakers talking about a new tax cut, and then this need to address the whole Vladimir Putin thing? What was it like in that room before the president issued his mea culpa? We have a guy who was there after this.
Some clarification.
All right, it's going to seem like Ohio Day on this show. I just want to clarify here that I was very happy to get anyone who was in the room with the president in that meeting where he was talking up tax cuts, and then lo and behold, we found out that he wanted to make an address to stipulate exactly what he meant when he was with Vladimir Putin, and lo and behold, Ohio Republican Congressman Jim Renacci joins us. He was in that room, and Congressman, great to have you. What was that like? Was the president, before he explained to the public and the press, telling you guys what he meant as well?
No, actually, we all heard it at the same time, but the president, it's always great to be in the room with the president because you do get the sense of his real concern for America, concern for the American worker, and also concern that he made, the difference in the words. And that's why, how many presidents would really step up and say, hey, I said the wrong word, and I meant it this way? I think it was important, if nothing else, and I think it was a good way of starting the meeting, even though we quickly went into the tax 2.0.
Now, Nancy Pelosi has issued a statement on that clarification, what she calls a backtracking. President Trump's attempt to walk back the dangerous, disgraceful, and damaging show of his Blame America First policy embarrasses our nation even further. She goes on to say, Congressman, after watching the president cower in front of Putin, the American people now deserve to know what Trump will do now. What do you think he has to do now?
Well, it's interesting, Neil, because those same people that are, they were high-fiving when President Obama said to Governor Romney that, that Russia was not a threat. These are the same people that are criticizing this president. They're also, no one was talking about the President Obama when he reached over and said to Vladimir Putin, hey, I'll be able to do more after the next election. These are the things that are so frustrating for me, a business guy, coming to Washington, because it's politics as usual. And again, Nancy Pelosi is just using politics as usual to make a position, which just isn't true. You heard the president say that he was wrong, and he moved on. But he also said
well, he didn't say that he was wrong as much as he misspoke.
Well, that's what I mean. He misspoke, and he said the wrong word.
Well, let me ask you a little bit about that, if you don't mind, Congressman. It's fed this maybe black helicopter crowd narrative that maybe, this is Nancy Pelosi saying this, other Democrats have been saying this, Vladimir Putin has something on him. Otherwise, he would have been more forceful, but he wasn't. What do you think of that?
Well, look, we don't know what all the president said in the 2-hour meeting on one-on-one, but I do know what he talked about. It was concerns. He also believes that we have to be able to deal and be able to talk with Russia. We have to be able to live within them. They're the part of the global family, whether we like them or not. That doesn't mean we have to trust him, but we have to talk to him. So the president is a business guy. He's somebody who uses his business sense to make decisions. I mean, I see so much of that because I was a business guy for 28 years. Sometimes you have to use business sense versus political sense. And again, that's really the difference. I get so tired of the political talking points. I do believe, look, there was no collusion. If there was collusion, it would have already shown up in all the hearings and all the investigations, whether it's the FBI, all the different organizations. So what we really need to do is realize, yes, was there some meddling? Absolutely. Do we agree with that? I think the president even said that today. But in the end, there was no collusion. And I think the elections in 2016, as we all know, would have not changed. None of the things that Russia did would have changed these elections. And we really do need to move forward because...
Well, let me ask you about moving forward, because some of your colleagues in the United States Senate, led by Marco Rubio, Lindsey Graham, are pushing legislation that would punish Russia if it even thought of doing something like this again, though it does not address its involvement in the 2016 election with additional sanctions for now. Does that have your support?
Well, remember, I said we need to move forward, but that moving forward means that if Russia does this, yes, we absolutely need to be able to go after them.
But I was surprised, sir, that Senator Rob Portman didn't know whether the president would go along with that. I thought someone would run that flagpole. No?
No, I think the president's pretty thoughtful. He'll listen to those, what we're talking about doing. But at the end,
what's to debate there? Of course, if you're going to cheat again, we're going to sanction you at the yin-yang.
I think like anything here in Washington, it's all about what's in the bill or what's in the writing or what's actually spelled out. Too many times we agree or think we agree to something and then we read it. So I'm always a big believer. I don't sign off on anything unless I've read it, seen it, and understand what it's all about. But I think the concept is good, and I think the president probably would support it. But again, he would have to make that decision.
Got it. Congressman, thank you very much. Good seeing you again.
Thank you. You too, Neil.
All right, the read from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. What does he do right now after this? Call this a mulligan.
In a key sentence in my remarks, I said the word would instead of wouldn't. The sentence should have been, I don't see any reason why I wouldn't, or why it wouldn't be Russia. So just to repeat it, I said the word would instead of wouldn't. And the sentence should have been, and I thought it would be maybe a little bit unclear on the transcript or unclear on the actual video. The sentence should have been, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be Russia.
All right, now this is the bad shot he wanted to forget. Remember this?
My people came to me, Dan Coates came to me, and some others. They said they think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be.
All right, so that was then all clarified now. Welcome, everybody. I'm Neil Cavuto, and this is your world, but not so fast. The president isn't getting off the hook the way maybe some in the White House thought he would. To Kristen Fisher at the White House with the very latest on this 180. What do we make of this, Kristen?
Well, I'll tell you what, Neil, this was supposed to be just a meeting with Republican lawmakers about tax reform 2.0, but now all anybody is talking about is what President Trump just said about what went down in Helsinki. And, you know, this really was just a stunning admission and a very rare reversal from a president who often doesn't make these kind of admissions or make these kinds of reversals. First, the admission which you had just pointed out, President Trump said today that he simply misspoke, that he meant to say the words would not when instead he said would. And, you know, he said that he figured it out by simply reading a transcript. He went through it, realized he made an error, and decided to come out today and correct himself. As for the reversal, and this is probably the one that's generating the most headlines and the one that had the most impact for the United States and its relations around the world, President Trump really did make a reversal. Yesterday, he was asked, you know, who do you believe most? Do you believe the U.S. intelligence community when they say that Russia meddled in the 2016 election, or do you believe Russian President